a few more cases, 1 to 2, kind of going up and down the legal system, but this was the one that we heard about as being the big one. And the Supreme Court just summarily said, absolutely not. And so specifically, what did the Supreme Court do today? They said, Texas, you can't be here. You can't come into the courthouse. You don't have standing. And we're not even going to get to the substance of these claims. And Justice Alito and Justice Thomas essentially said, maybe we have jurisdiction, but I don't think we would get to the claims either. And so what we see here is the Supreme Court very quickly and in a very short ruling saying, no, we will not be hearing from you, Texas. You cannot come into the courthouse doors. In terms of the case, it was Texas suing those 4 swing states that you talked about, and Texas saying, you did something in those states that's so wrong, you kind of relaxing some of the restrictions or creating different restrictions as a result of COVID, that created such problems that we should just trash the votes in those 4 states, and instead the state legislature should pick the electors. That's not going to happen. The Electoral College will vote on Monday.
So I wonder, Jessica, what makes this lawsuit so different than the presidential lawsuits, the president and his legal team? Why is this one getting so much play, and how did it make it to the Supreme Court so quickly?
I think it got so much play in part because it's so splashy and there were so many Electoral College votes at issue. And we were told, like, this is the big one. This is the lawsuit that we have been waiting for. And 126 Republicans in the House of Representatives said we support it. I think 17 different states said we support it. So I think that's why there was so much buzz around this suit, that it was really the last gasp of the legal strategy and one that garnered a lot of support. Now, your question of how did it get to the Supreme Court? That's a great question. In this case, what happened is Texas directly sued these 4 states. So it was 1 state against 4 states. And Texas tried to go directly to the Supreme Court using something called original jurisdiction, meaning you don't have to work your way up through the court system like you typically would. And what Texas said is, well, when we have a case of 1 state versus other states, there's nobody else that can possibly preside over that. So we get to go straight to the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court has heard about 12 cases based on original jurisdiction in the last 20 years. It's a very rare route. And so that's how it got to the Supreme Court. There was no trial court at this point. There was no court of appeals. It went straight to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said on a procedural issue, Texas, you can't be here.
Now, had it passed through, what would have been the next step?
So if it would have continued, the next step would be to probably have oral arguments in an emergency basis, because again, under federal law, the Electoral College is going to vote on Monday, the 14th. They could have set a very, very quick briefing schedule if they wanted any additional briefs. They would have basically had to hear oral arguments over the weekend. But none of that will happen. And frankly, I think members of the Supreme Court probably are excited about that. They don't like these big controversial cases. One thing that was interesting to note, President Trump's appointees, his 3 appointees, said absolutely nothing. There was no recorded dissent at all in this case from them.
You obviously mentioned it earlier, but I find it interesting that Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas did say they would at least hear the case. So why do you think the other justices decided in the other direction versus them?
I think the other justices looked at the law, and there simply is no standing in this case. There is a huge procedural defect, and 7-2 with both liberal judges and conservative judges, they looked and they said, Texas can't be the one to bring this suit. They don't have standing as a procedural doctrine, so they don't have enough of an injury You can't show that there's causation of a concrete injury, and you can't show that if Texas wins the case, there's something called redressability. Now, in this case, why did Justices Alito and Thomas say something else? They looked at the court's so-called original jurisdiction that we just talked about and said, basically, we would have let them in the courthouse doors, but we're not saying that anything different would have happened.
Yeah, so this was obviously just one of the very primal steps in what the Supreme Court does. That's kind of the basis of that very stage number one. Question now moving forward, is there any pathway for appeal? Could this come back around or no?
No, the Supreme Court is the final word. So I apologize, I'm getting a little echo here. So the Supreme Court is the final word, and there is no way to appeal that decision, and there's no way for Texas to try to create standing for itself. This really is the end of the legal challenges. This is the end of the road when it comes to President Trump trying to go to the Supreme Court to overturn the results of the election.
Now, Jessica, let's talk timing. We obviously talked about the Electoral College vote, what happens during that, and then what happens following that. Obviously, January is where everyone is kind of looking right now.
Yeah, so on December 14th, Monday, December 14th, the Electoral College actually will vote. And then there could be some drama or theatrics in Congress. By January 6th, Congress is supposed to certify those results. And then on January 20th, we have an inauguration. I expect at this point that, again, we've really come to a conclusion when it comes to the legal issues. I think there could be some more political hardball. I expect that there will still be more arguments that the election was stolen, that there was fraud, that it was rigged. But I don't think that we're going to see any new lawsuits being filed. And I don't think we're going to see anything. Well, we might see some drama, some theatrics when it comes to the Electoral College voting and those votes being counted. I don't think we're going to see anything that would change the outcome here, that would change the fact that Joe Biden got well over 270 votes.
So I find that interesting. You say you don't see any other lawsuits coming forward, but the president himself is saying they are not going to stop until this is finished. So could he technically be putting new lawsuits, him and his legal team, through? And is there a possibility that they could make it to the Supreme Court again?
So there's always the possibility. I mean, anybody is free to file a lawsuit. It doesn't mean that it's a meritorious lawsuit. It doesn't mean that a court will hear those cases. But the president could absolutely go forward. He has said, it's not over till it's over. I would say at this point, but it is over. We've already passed something that you and I talked about, which is December 8th was the so-called safe harbor deadline. The deadline by which if states certify their election results, then Congress has to accept their Electoral College slate. Every state except Wisconsin certified their election results by the safe harbor deadline. It's hard to envision a new legal strategy at this point. We have seen upwards of 60 cases being filed. Again, anybody is free if they can, pay for the filing fee to file another lawsuit, but it's not clear what the allegations would be, what law they would have alleged has been violated here.
Yeah, and Jessica, obviously, there's still an election that's in place right now. The Georgia Senate runoff is ongoing. So technically, could lawsuits still be put in place for that? Because obviously the president and his team are alleging that there was major voter fraud in the state of Georgia. So is it likely that they could pursue litigation out there again?
They could. The Georgia litigation, like the other litigation, really has wound down at this point. And I think that I'm not sure there's going to be a big appetite to continue that litigation because Republicans, I think, are in a bit of a strange position saying there was massive voter fraud when it comes to the election in November, but you should absolutely come out to vote and weigh in when it comes to the runoff elections in January. And we frankly have already seen a number of Republicans in Georgia saying a version of actually, no, we had a free and fair election in this case, and please do come out to vote when it comes to that January runoff, which obviously is very important for the balance of power in the Senate. The election litigation that the president has engaged in, he has not argued that there's massive fraud for the down ballot races, particularly where Republicans have won. He said really that it has been just the presidential election, or he's tried to kind of segregate that out. So, in answer to your question, there could be continuing litigation, but it really at this point has wound down. We've already seen the conclusion of the major litigation in Georgia. There's nothing that could change the results of the presidential election. And I think Republicans are going to try and be careful not to make voters feel like they can't come out and trust the election administration in January.
Jessica, Biden won the Electoral College 306 to 232. Could those numbers change technically when it comes to the Electoral College? Is it possible before they vote?
It's very, very, very unlikely for a couple of reasons. One, what we just talked about, which is that the Electoral College, the states have already certified there's a result by the safe harbor deadline, December 8th. The other is that electors, members of the Electoral College, really tend to be party loyalists. So when we think about will they change sides, will they flip and vote for somebody else? The answer 9.5 or more times out of 10 is they don't. In addition, more than half of states have so-called loyalty laws where they will either remove or punish electors who quote unquote go rogue. And just in July, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld those laws, saying, yes, states can either remove a faithless elector or punish a faithless elector. So is it, in even 2020, in our topsy-turvy world, could we possibly see a situation where there's movement in the Electoral College? Possibly, but I think it is extraordinarily unlikely that we would see any change from the outcome here. Even if one Electoral College vote changes, that in and of itself would be huge news.
Yeah, with that spread, it would have to be significant, those changes. Jessica, is there anything that I'm missing that you found interesting through this entire Texas lawsuit? I mean, we talked about the history of, election fraud allegations from elections in the past. Was this unique in any way, this Texas lawsuit? Several states kind of coming in at the last moment, House representatives joining in at the last moment as well. Have we seen anything like this in the past, in past elections?
No, that's a great question. This is very rare. And what's also a great part of your question is that what was being argued by Texas is not directly the same arguments that we heard outside of the courtroom. For people who are, curious about the post-election litigation, there's a difference between what was being argued outside of the courtroom, which is there was massive voter fraud, and then what was being argued inside the courtroom, which was much narrower, much smaller, much tamer. Arguments like there wasn't meaningful access to watching people count the votes, but there was no evidence of that. Or arguments like we saw in the Texas case, where they really said that the changes to allow people to vote by mail, to allow more people to vote by mail during COVID, that those changes were improper. That's different from saying there was massive voter fraud. But all of these allegations, it's very, very rare to see anything like this level of post-election litigation, to see anything like these particular claims. And it's extremely rare to see a situation where you have one side win one fairly insignificant case. And as of the time we're talking, I believe it's now 57 cases that the president and his allies have lost.
Yeah. Definitely interesting to be noting, and we'll be keeping our eyes on any of those developing details as the president continues to pursue litigation in the 2020 election. We want to thank Jessica Levinson for coming on News Now from Fox. Your expertise is amazing. We appreciate having you. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Thank you for having me.
So again, you're watching News Now from Fox. That was Jessica Levinson. We've had her on the show several times in the past, just talking about what we need to know. This has been a historic election with all the lawsuits, with all of the changes in the middle of a pandemic. Voting looked a lot different this year. So she has been our safe haven for giving us all the details and kind of a history lesson too. So again, you're watching News Now from Fox. I'm Daytona Everett. I'm going to send some of you off to a 2-minute commercial break. I do want to tease to later tonight. We've been doing kind of a political rundown, all of the day's top headlines, and we have a lot to discuss today, as we do every single day. But Andrew Kraft and myself will break down all of the headlines that you need to know as we head into another busy week and likely a busy weekend as well. So like I said, some of you will be going off to a 2-minute commercial break. When you come back, we got a lot more to talk about here on News Now from Fox. You're watching News Now from Fox. Like we said, we got a lot more to get to, but to lead us up to our political breakdown, President-elect Joe Biden held yet another event today introducing more key members of his cabinet. So we'll play that out for you here on News Now from Fox.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Before I make my announcements today, I want to say a few words about the COVID crisis. This week marked another tragic milestone in our fight against COVID-19. More than 3,000 deaths in one single day, the highest single death count during this pandemic. That's more deaths in a single day than we saw on 9/11 or at Pearl Harbor. This is serious business. And the current director of the CDC said yesterday, we can expect the similar numbers of deaths or more every single day for the next 60 to 90 days. We're in the teeth of a crisis right now. And this nation needs presidential leadership right now. Presidential leadership that is willing to model the steps we should be taking to save our own lives and lives of our families. You know, we can wish this away, but we have to face it head on. We have to take it head on. Using every power available to me as president, we'll have a national coordinated strategy that will beat this virus. You know, and as tough as things are now, I firmly believe better days are ahead. We've got some good news yesterday. The FDA committee, recommended emergency use authorization for Pfizer's BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. But we're grateful for the scientists at these, not only there, but other great organizations, researchers who developed this vaccine and several others on the way. And we're just as grateful to the scientists and the public experts who evaluated its safety and efficiency, free from political influence. I want to make it clear to the public, you should have confidence in this. There is no political influence. These are first-rate scientists taking their time looking at all of the elements that need to be looked at. Scientific integrity led us to this point. We know the immense challenges and hard work ahead. Earlier this week, I announced our COVID response team that'll scale up the manufacturing, distribution, and injection of the vaccine. We set a bold and doable challenge in my first 100 days. 100 million shots in 100 days. Asking the American people to wear masks for the first 100 days of our administration. And if we get the necessary funding from Congress, we can get most of our schools open in 100 days, but we need the help from the Congress and the funding. The first 100 days won't end the COVID-19, but meeting those goals can slow the spread, save lives, and get us back to our lives with the people we love the most. And we'll also be getting the right people confirmed during this period of time and in place to manage this robust, aggressive plan to contain the virus, help us build back better than ever, and make sure everyone is included.